This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Joyce Davis, PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor, and this is Battleground PA. I am really pleased to tell you that I think we're going to have a very good conversation today about one of the most important things that I think we're dealing with in this election, other than who we're going to vote for, right, is mail-in voting. And all of the fighting that's around this, it's like weird. I'm one of the people who thinks you should be able to vote online. But anyway, before I go off on a tangent, let me introduce my guest, Marian Schneider. Marian, how are you? Welcome.
I'm well, thank you for having me.
All right, Marian Schneider is here, and she is actually with the ACLU PA, but she's in here. I invited her in a kind of another capacity to talk about efforts that are being made by several groups who are coming together to try to defend mail-in balloting. Do I have that right, Marian? You tell me, straighten me out if I'm wrong.
Well, the ACLU, all the work that I do in voting rights is with the ACLU of Pennsylvania, and we are members of a broad coalition of groups that we provide a lot of legal support to those groups who are engaging with voters all across the Commonwealth and helping them navigate applying for, first getting registered to vote and then applying for a mail ballot and then getting that mail ballot submitted properly. So there's a lot of work that's going on, and county advocacy, voter education and outreach, and advocacy with the Department of State, as well as litigation. So there's many tools in the toolbox.
Well, you're the one. You told me that it's almost 80 groups or so that you say that have come together. Tell me, what's the number and where are they and who are they?
Well, I think it's closer to 40 or 45 groups. Okay. And I'm talking the 501c3s, which are nonprofit, nonpartisan groups that do not endorse or work for any political party or political campaign. And some of the big groups you have probably heard of is Common Cause, for example, and New Pennsylvania Project, All Voting is Local, NAACP, Pennsylvania Conference. There's really too numerous to name, but there's some that are quite local. One of our clients is Make the Road Pennsylvania, who invests in Black and brown communities and also Spanish-speaking communities. There's just so many groups that are trying to engage citizens on many different levels.
So they're coming together under this title. What is it? It's Pennsylvania Voters Decide. So
right.
Tell me about Pennsylvania Voters Decide.
Well, that coalition got started because in addition, so for many years, since the civil rights movement in the mid-60s, we've been fighting fighting voter suppression, fighting to make sure that there aren't discriminatory processes that prevent Black and brown voters from voting. So that's like your run-of-the-mill, your run-of-the-mill voter suppression. But since 2020, we've had to deal with election denialism, in which there are those that would undermine the foundation of our democracy and sow chaos and distrust in elections as an institution. And so the PA Voters Decide came together to combat that particular, in addition, like it's both, right? It's both voter suppression that we've had to deal with forever, and this new, we can't trust voting at all those issues. And so that's what the PA Voters Decide Coalition is doing. And you may have seen some of the work that we did in Dauphin County, because we did do a mobilization effort in Dauphin County when we learned that they were considering adopting a voluntary notice and cure program to alert voters that they might have had a disqualifying defect on their mail ballot envelope, and to alert them so that they could come and correct the defect before Election Day. So that did happen. And so we were really excited about that.
That did happen, and I was so excited about it. And PennLive has even put an editorial out saying kudos to everybody. And then, boom, we get hit with a big splash of cold water to say, wait a minute, not so fast. There's still fighting underway. So tell us, where do things stand now? I think you have some late information to give us.
Well, there was a Commonwealth Court decision today in the lawsuit that arose in Washington County, where the CCJ, which is the Coalition for Co-Field Justice, and some individual voters sued Washington County Board of Elections under the Pennsylvania Constitution. And what the case is about is this. Washington County decided in 2023, they had a voluntary notice and cure program. They decided not to do that. That's fine. But what they did instead is that even though when ballots came to their office and they could see on that return envelope that there was a mistake, and even though they were scanning the ballots and observing either the date was wrong or the date was missing or the signature was missing, they would set aside the ballots, and there would be two bins: the not to count bin and the to be counted bin, and they would put the voters that had the mistakes on the envelopes in the do not count bin. But they wouldn't tell the voters that they were doing that. And even if the voters called the election bureau, the Board of Elections instructed the staff not to tell the voters that their ballot was in the do not count bin. And so we felt that it was fundamentally unfair for the Washington County Board of Elections to know days and sometimes weeks before the election that they were not going to count someone's mail ballot and not tell them, so that they could either challenge that decision or try to save their vote by voting a provisional ballot. And so our argument is that the procedural due process guarantee of the Pennsylvania Constitution requires that the county has to tell voters that this is what's going to happen. And the trial court agreed with us, and today the Commonwealth Court on Appeal agreed with us.
Oh, goodness. So that's a victory. Wow.
Yeah, that's another win, another one in the win column.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and so I want to be very clear that when you talk about notice and cure, that's a term of art. And that's what that means is that it's a voluntary, in Pennsylvania it's voluntary, in some states it's in the statute, but in Pennsylvania it's voluntary. The Board of Elections can decide, okay, we're going to alert voters, and we're going to tell them that they made a mistake, and we're going to give them opportunity to correct the mistake they made or give them a replacement ballot before the election. Counties don't have to do that, and that's fine. But what the Constitution requires is before you deprive someone of their constitutional right to vote, you have to tell them you're going to do that so that they can take steps to either challenge that decision or to preserve their vote. Now, provisional voting's been around for 22 years. It was a congressional statute, the Help America Vote Act, that established provisional voting, and Congress mandated that every state implement it, and Pennsylvania did so 22 years ago. So provisional voting is completely separate. It's not mail voting. And in the federal statute, you have a right to, if you believe that you have a right to vote a provisional ballot, you can't be prohibited from voting that. And Pennsylvania has specific reasons for why you can vote a provisional ballot too. And it applies to all elections, not just federal elections. So
really stop right here, Marian, because I know this is second nature to you, but we have people out here who may tune in. So provisional ballot, mail-in ballot, absentee ballot. Make it plain. What's the difference between these things?
Well, absentee ballot we've had forever. It's in the Constitution. That's if you're going to be away, either your business takes you away, you're on vacation, or you're ill and can't attend your polling place, you can vote by absentee. We've had that. Act 77, 2019, before the pandemic, no excuse absentee voting, which we also call mail voting. Any registered voter in Pennsylvania can use that method of voting. And then provisional voting is when you go to the polls, if, for example, there's a couple of reasons. Maybe your name's not in the poll book, and maybe you think it should be, you get to vote a provisional ballot. Maybe you're a first-time voter in the polling place and you don't have ID, or you don't have an acceptable form, although there's a lot of, we fought that fought and won that in 2012 and 2013, but you don't have your ID. Or and under the Act 77 mail voting statute, if you have not voted your mail ballot, you can go to the polling place and vote a provisional ballot. So those are all the reasons that you can vote a provisional ballot. And it's the reason it's provisional is it's not counted in the polling place. It goes to the county and they look at it after the fact and they assess whether you're registered, whether you're in the right place. And if you're a valid registered voter, that ballot will be counted. The provisional ballot will be counted unless some exception applies, like you didn't show up with your ID. You have 6 days after the election to show up with your ID. But what the disputes are about is that there's an exception for counting provisional ballots if the mail ballot was timely received. And we have argued that that means to prevent double voting. So if they're not going to count your mail ballot, then they should count your provisional ballot, because you get to vote once, but only once, and not 2 times and not 0 times.
And so for example, if they were to cooperate with voters and notify them, guess what? Your mail-in ballot is can't use it. It allows them to come in then and do a provisional ballot and vote in person, correct?
Right. Well, they can vote. They vote the provisional ballot, and then it'll be decided afterwards whether it will count. So, but yes, that's exactly right. It's a fail-safe. It's to preserve the right to vote, because in 2002, when Congress enacted the Help America Vote Act, they were really concerned about all these voters in Florida who didn't get to vote because they weren't in the poll books. And for other reasons, that election workers were not letting people vote. And they're like, okay, let's let voters cast a ballot and we can decide after the fact, instead of having to decide in the heat of the election whether they can vote or not. And so that's why it was enacted.
Right. Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, I could get the partisanship over this issue because it's clearly a partisan thing. It seems that the Republican side seem to be challenging this and trying to do. But wouldn't this help all voters if
Yes.
you made it? I mean, if I'm a Republican voter and my ballot doesn't have the date on it, it's going to go into that pile of trash as well as the
Not
Democrat
trash.
vote.
No.
Okay, well, go ahead. But I mean, it's not going to be counted. Right? Or I mean, I just don't understand why they don't see it will help all voters, not just Democratic voters.
That's absolutely right. In fact, we've had some Republican voters who have been our clients in some of the cases we've litigated about counting mail ballots. So we represent independents, Republicans, Democrats, and since we've been litigating, we got involved. The first litigation was in 2021, and so we definitely have had all voters from all political spectrums. And to us, it doesn't matter. Every valid registered voter should have their voice heard on election day, period.
That's been our argument as well, that we think this will make it easier for people who are sick, for working folks who may have a difficult time, people difficult with transportation, and clearly elderly people. It's easier to vote by mail and to do this and to be alerted if something wasn't wrong. And we think it will benefit equally Democrats as well as Republicans and independents too. So, but just so we don't ignore, what valid reason could there be for not wanting to alert a voter who has mailed in their ballot? What valid reason would there be for not wanting to let them know?
Well, I don't think there is a valid reason, and neither does the Court of Common Pleas of Washington County nor the Commonwealth Court. They've said, no, the Constitution requires you to do so, and there's no burden. I mean, I cannot speculate why counties would not want to do so, but I'll just say this: there are those who would look at the election code and look at the statutes and say, it's a ceiling. Like, this is it. We don't go above it. And then there's the others who look at it and say it's a floor, not a ceiling. So you can strict the. I think that. I think a bunch of things, though. There are partisan tinges to this, but by and large, I think those who are in the trenches doing the work of elections are working really hard and trying to make sure that elections run smoothly and safely. I do believe that because I used to be an election official, so I understand that. But I will say there are some who do go out of their way to not count votes, and I do not understand that. So I'm with you there.
Well, okay. And I will say the other point that you made is worth us having a little bit of a time to discuss as well. And that is the overall issue of voter suppression and intimidation. And I don't know how much we're dealing with that in Pennsylvania. I've heard some horror stories in Georgia and other places, but do we have to worry about voters of color or minority voters being intimidated from at the polls or from voting?
Well, I think that we do worry about it, but we try to have things in place to prevent it from happening. I'll just give you a story of a case that I litigated in 2008 when President Obama was running for the first time. I live in Chester County, and Lincoln University is an HBCU in Chester County, and they had moved the polling place to an inadequately sized polling location for the number of voters. And during that election, um, and this is just an observation of fact, the Republican poll watchers challenged every student identity, and that led to a lot of provisional voting, and there was just incredibly long lines for voting at that polling location. So we brought suit under the Voting Rights Act, saying that that two things: one, that the polling place was inadequately sized for the population, and that the Board of Elections should have had an adequate polling location. It was off campus at a community hall that was way too small for the number of voters. And two, that there was discriminatory, those challenges were discriminatorily motivated. And we settled that case very quickly after suit, and the polling place has been on the Lincoln University campus ever since. So that was a win also, but that's the kind of thing that you might see in a close election, where you might see whole categories of voters being challenged. Now, the judges of election, who are the officials in charge of the polling location, should shut down any kind of bad faith or systemic challenges that are obviously based on race or language access. We've had in 2004, we had similar issues in Berks County. And in fact, the Department of Justice actually sued Berks County and had them under a consent decree for a while, but now they are now governed under the Voting Rights Act, where Voting Rights Act requires counties where the population, limited English proficient voters, reach a certain threshold. They're required to have voting materials in both English and the other language. Berks County, Lehigh County, Philadelphia County are all covered. All three for Spanish, and then Philadelphia for Chinese. So we might see some issues with language access this year. We might see some issues with baseless challenges inside the polling place. But one thing that our coalition does is we're members of the Election Protection Coalition, which is a national coalition of hundreds of organizations. And there's a hotline, 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and voters can call that hotline. And we also have poll monitors at the polling locations to help voters in real time. And what ACLU does is we staff a command center, and if they can't, so they call the hotline. If they can't be resolved right away, it gets escalated to us, and we try to resolve these issues in real time. And we'll call the county, or we'll call the Department of State, or if we have to call law enforcement, we'll call law enforcement, or we'll call the DA or the solicitor, whoever we have to call. We do it.
You know, Marian, that's important for people to know, though, as they're going to the polls. I want to help publicize that, because if you go to the polls and you're in trouble, you don't expect that, for one thing, right? And so what do
Right.
you do? And so I think we probably need to put some word out there. If you go to the polls and in trouble, here's where you call. Here's what you do. Here's how to react. Don't risk your life over it.
No,
Right?
no, no, absolutely. And sometimes like I'm just putting the website, the EP website with the hotline, and I'm going to put this in the chat for you too. The hotline is, so we will have a Pennsylvania specific call center where Pennsylvania lawyers will be answering the hotline in presidential years. They also have a Spanish English lines, 888 VE Vota, and there's Asian language lines, which the API, which is Asian Americans, Asian American Pacific Islander organization, and there's an Arabic English hotline. So voters can get help if they need it. And, by and large, a lot of the calls are, what time do the polls open? What time do the polls close? Where's my polling location? Am I registered to vote? And the call hotline volunteers, they can take care of those. But if anything on that they can't resolve, it gets escalated, and ACLU will have two command centers, one in Philly, one in Pittsburgh. We cover the state, and voters should feel free to call the hotline if they have an issue. And even before, like if there's an issue with mail voting, we'll have people taking care of tickets.
Well, it's good to know that you guys are there, frankly, to be able to be support for voters. I mean, that during these times when people are worried. I mean, a lot of people are worried. And I will say, people like ACLU, but others, I just learned that there's a coalition of interfaith people who are organizing to be chaplains, peacekeepers at the polls. Are you aware of that? Are they working with you guys as well?
Well, we work with Power Interfaith, which is mostly in southeastern PA, but I wasn't aware of that particular organizing effort, but I think that's a great idea. I mean, we're all neighbors, and we need to support each other. And we may not agree on everything, but we have to go grocery shopping and see each other at the supermarket. And we live together and we need to coexist. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, well, this one, they apparently are training people to be able to keep the peace, to protect people, and so that things don't escalate. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, because, as you said, Marian, so beautifully, we are all neighbors. Whether we all have the same problem, whether we approach solving it in different ways should not cause us to hate each other. But to pull together. So I love that. The final thing to talk about is the other one that you raised, and that we've also had heard from Al Schmidt, that and to undermine that confidence does not do anyone any good. So talk a little bit about how you guys feel about the sanctity of the vote in Pennsylvania.
Well, certainly the right to vote is foundational. It underlies all other of our rights and all other our constitutional rights, because whether you believe in reproductive freedoms, freedom of the press, the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, unreasonable searches and seizure, all of those issues, you have to elect people who align with your values on those issues. And in order to do that is the right to vote. So that's why the right to vote is foundational. So I don't think it, I really don't think it helps our democracy or advances our democratic ideals to undermine the institution of voting, which I feel has been happening since 2020. And I think that the rhetoric around that is really unfortunate and has put a lot of election officials in harm's way for no good reason, because they're just trying to do their job and they're just trying to run an election as smoothly as possible. And we do have partisan actors who may have different rhetoric, but in general, the people who are actually doing the work are working really hard. And they, in general, want people to vote, and they want people to have an easy time voting. So I really wish that rhetoric would tone down, and I wish that the calls, to say that there's cheating or there's people who shouldn't be on the rolls, those narratives are not true, and they don't do anything to help advance our democratic ideals.
Well, very good. I want to thank you, Marian, for taking the time out. And I know it was on short notice to come and join us to talk about these issues. So right now, are you feeling like mail-in voting and even the checking of the vote and letting people know, do you feel like that's going to be a safe thing for this election?
Well, the cases are still going on, so I do think that we will have
Okay.
clarity in the law. I think we will have clarity in the law before the election, though. And right now, people should try to follow all the instructions as best they can. But our hope is that if they make a mistake, because they're human, that they'll be able to correct those mistakes beforehand.
Well, thank you very much. Marian Schneider, ACLU PA, also speaking on behalf of our coalition called Pennsylvania Voters Decide. We thank you again for being with us, and please join us again next week for another episode of Battleground PA. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, Marian.
Thank you for having me.